Lonely Lumberjack took in a pregnant girl sold by her brother. What he found was more than a family. The forest stretched endlessly, a living ocean of green, swaying under the constant wind that swept across the remote planet of Thalora. Garrick, a tall, rugged man with calloused hands and sun-roughened skin, moved carefully among the towering trees. Each step was deliberate, measured. He had learned long ago that a single wrong move could cost him days of work or worse. The forest was alive, but it was not friendly. Strange creatures scuttled in the underbrush, glowing insects filled the air with faint light, and trees groaned under the weight of their own branches. He carried his axe over his shoulder, pausing occasionally to inspect the giants he intended to harvest. The trees of Thalora were prized across human colonies for their strength and flexibility. Spacecraft would come to collect them, and Garrick, working alone, was responsible for sending them safely. He had no company, no distractions, no interruptions. In some ways, he liked it that way. Solitude had been his choice, and he had grown used to the endless rhythm of work, survival, and quiet reflection. But that evening the wind carried a sound that did not belong. A soft, uneven crunch of footsteps, careful but desperate, reached his ears. Garrick froze, listening. It was impossible for anyone to move quietly in the dense undergrowth without alerting him, yet these footsteps were different. They were human. Garrick moved silently, weaving between the trees until he found the source of the sound. There, crouched beneath the thick roots of a massive silverwood tree, was a young woman. Her clothes were worn and torn, and she clutched her stomach as if protecting it from harm. Her hair was tangled, streaked with dirt, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Who's there?" Garrick called softly, not wanting to startle her too much. The girl flinched, pressing herself further into the shadows. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered. Her voice was weak, trembling. Garrick studied her carefully. He had seen many colonists over the years, lost or desperate, but something about this girl made him pause. She wasn't just scared, she was running. Desperation hung around her like a cloak, and the way she held her stomach, she was pregnant. "I won't hurt you," he said firmly, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible. "You're safe here for now, but you need to tell me why you're out here alone." She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone or something to emerge from the forest. They sold me," she said finally, her voice breaking. "My brother, he didn't care. I had nowhere else to go." Garrick's brow furrowed. The word sold struck him harder than the loneliness he had grown used to. He had heard of such things happening in distant colonies, people trading relatives or abandoning them when life became too difficult, but he had never expected to encounter it himself. "Come with me," he said. His voice was firm but not unkind. "You can't stay out here." "It's too dangerous." She looked at him, eyes wide, almost as if she didn't believe him. Then, after a long moment, she nodded. Garrick extended a hand, and she took it hesitantly. Together they walked through the dense forest, the wind whipping around them, carrying the smell of rain and earth. Garrick's cabin was not far. He had built it himself, a sturdy structure of Thalora timber and metal, insulated against the frequent storms that swept across the planet. As they approached, he noticed her shivering. "You're cold," he said, opening the door. Inside, the cabin was simple but warm. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting soft light over the wooden walls. "Sit," he instructed gently, handing her a thick blanket. She accepted it, wrapping it around herself like it was a lifeline. "What's your name?" Garrick asked. "Myra," she whispered. "Okay, Myra." "I'm Garrick, you're safe here." Myra looked at him, suspicion lingering in her eyes. Why help me? You don't know me." Garrick shrugged, sitting down across from her. "Maybe, but I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it feels like when the world doesn't care." "You don't have to explain everything. Not yet. Just rest." She nodded again, closing her eyes. Garrick studied her for a moment before moving to the small kitchen area. He prepared a simple meal, dried vegetables, boiled tubers, and some protein blocks. Myra ate slowly, her movements hesitant but grateful. Garrick watched quietly, letting her set the pace. As the evening deepened, the storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the cabin, and the wind howled like a wild animal. Garrick sat by the fire, listening to the storm and to the soft breathing of the girl who now slept, finally feeling safe. He thought about her words, "They sold me." His mind traced the possibilities: her brother, a desperate family, or worse, human traders exploiting the frontier colonies. He knew that if anyone found her here, they would not hesitate to take her. Garrick realized that his role had changed. He was no longer just a lumberjack working alone in the forest. He was a protector now. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Garrick taught Myra how to move safely through the forest, how to avoid the wildlife that lurked beyond the cabin, and how to gather food and water. She surprised him with her resilience and adaptability. Despite her condition, she learned quickly, her mind sharp and resourceful. She even began helping him with small tasks around the cabin, fixing broken tools, organizing supplies, and learning to read the subtle signs of the forest. Garrick found himself talking to her more than he expected, sharing stories of the planet of his past and of the work he did. Myra listened, occasionally asking questions, her curiosity growing alongside her confidence. "You're very clever," Garrick remarked one morning as she figured out a way to balance a heavy log on the makeshift cart. Myra smiled faintly. "I had to be," she said simply. "I didn't have a choice before. I had to learn fast or I wouldn't have survived." Her words struck Garrick. She reminded him of the strength that humans carried, even when circumstances seemed impossible. It wasn't just survival, it was determination, ingenuity, and courage. And Garrick felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose beyond the work he had always done alone. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the first stars appeared, Myra approached Garrick. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked softly. Garrick chuckled a low, rough sound. "All the time, but I like it. I've had time to think, to work, to be just me." Myra looked down at her hands. "I haven't had time to be myself for a long time, always running, always hiding." "You're safe here," Garrick said firmly. "No one can hurt you here, not as long as I'm around." For the first time since she arrived, Myra allowed herself to believe it. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through the tension on her face. Garrick felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew. Garrick taught Myra more than survival skills. He shared his knowledge of the land, the cycles of the forest, the ways to read the weather and the movements of the wildlife. Myra, in turn, brought ingenuity and creativity to tasks that Garrick had performed the same way for years. She built small devices to make their work easier, repaired broken tools, and even discovered new uses for the plants that grew around them. One afternoon, while working near a stream, Myra paused, her hand resting on her stomach. "I feel different," she said quietly. Garrick looked at her, concern flashing in his eyes. "Different how?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe it's time to start thinking about the future." Her words lingered in the air. Garrick realized she was right. They couldn't live in hiding forever. The forest could protect them for now, but eventually they would have to face the wider galaxy, the dangers and the possibilities beyond their cabin. That night, Garrick sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He thought about the child Myra carried, about the strength and resilience that already shone from her. He thought about the future and the world beyond the forest, and he realized that for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He had taken in a stranger, a girl abandoned by her own family, and in doing so, he had found a connection, a spark of humanity that reminded him why survival was more than just existing. It was about courage, compassion, and the unyielding will to protect and nurture life, even in the most remote corners of the galaxy. The wind outside had softened, and the storm had passed. Garrick looked at Myra, sleeping peacefully under the blanket, and felt a quiet determination settle over him. He would protect her, he would teach her, and together they would face whatever the universe had in store. Because in the vast, untamed wilderness of Thalora, Garrick finally understood something he had long forgotten. Survival was not just about living. It was about living together, protecting each other, and finding hope where none seemed possible. The forest of Thalora seemed alive in a way that Garrick had never fully appreciated until Myra arrived. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, every flicker of movement in the underbrush carried meaning. Garrick had known the forest as a place of work, a place to harvest trees and survive, but with Myra, it became a living classroom, a place where survival and hope intertwined. Myra was adjusting quickly. Despite her pregnancy, she moved with determination and curiosity. She learned to identify which plants could be eaten, which herbs could heal, and which roots could be used for fuel. Garrick watched her with admiration. She reminded him of himself when he had first arrived on Thalora, eager, sharp, and unafraid of challenges, even when they seemed impossible. One morning, the two of them walked along a narrow ridge above a deep valley. The forest stretched below them in a tapestry of green, shimmering with dew in the early sunlight. Myra carried a small satchel with foraged plants, while Garrick hefted his axe over his shoulder. "Why do you teach me all of this?" Myra asked, glancing up at him. "I could have learned it on my own, maybe." Garrick shook his head. "You could survive on your own, sure, but surviving isn't enough. You need to understand the forest, respect it, and know how it moves. One mistake, and it could be the last mistake you make. You can learn alone, but you'll learn faster with guidance." Myra nodded thoughtfully. "I never had guidance. I had to rely on myself. It was hard, but I survived." "And you will keep surviving," Garrick said firmly, "because you're smart, resourceful, and brave. Those are the qualities that humans have that make them unique." Myra smiled faintly. "Unique, huh?" Garrick shrugged. "Yes, you adapt, you learn, you push forward when things seem impossible. That's not something every species can do." The valley below them was alive with motion. Small creatures scurried through the undergrowth, and a few larger, lumbering beasts grazed in the open spaces. Garrick pointed out patterns in their behavior, explaining how to move without startling them and how to gather food safely. Myra listened carefully, absorbing every detail. As they worked, Myra began experimenting. She started designing small tools to make their tasks easier. A lever to move heavy logs, a pulley system to lift supplies from the stream below, and even a simple device to help grind herbs more efficiently. Garrick watched her in quiet amazement. "You're inventive," he said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've been doing this for years, and I never thought of some of these ideas." Myra shrugged. "I had to think differently. When you have nothing and no one, you have to find new ways. Old methods don't always work." Garrick nodded, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He realized that her perspective was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. Survival was not just about strength and skill. It was about thinking creatively, about seeing the forest in ways that others might not. The days passed in a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet reflection. Myra's presence brought warmth to Garrick's lonely cabin. They shared meals, told stories, and began to laugh again, small, careful laughter at first, but genuine. Garrick found himself looking forward to her observations and ideas, and Myra found comfort in the steady, reliable presence of the man who had saved her. One evening, as the twin moons of Thalora rose over the horizon, painting the forest in silver light, Myra sat outside the cabin, staring up at the sky. Garrick joined her, leaning back against a tree. "It's beautiful," Myra said softly. "Even in the middle of all this danger and fear, it's beautiful." "Yes," Garrick agreed. "The universe has a way of reminding us of that. Even in the harshest places, life finds a way to be extraordinary." Myra's hand rested lightly on her stomach. "I wonder what will happen when the baby comes. Will it survive? Will it be strong like you say humans are?" Garrick thought for a long moment. "It will survive, and not just survive, it will thrive, because humans are adaptable, because you're adaptable. And because together we can give it the best chance possible." Myra nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and fear. "I hope you're right." The next day, Garrick decided it was time to take a risk. He wanted to expand their resources to ensure they had enough food and supplies for the months to come. They would venture deeper into the forest, exploring areas Garrick had never dared to enter alone. "Are you ready?" he asked, adjusting the pack on his shoulder. Myra nodded. "Yes, I can handle it." They moved carefully through the forest, following the sounds of a distant stream. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and growing plants. Birds called to each other from high above, and the occasional rustle of a creature moving unseen kept them alert. After several hours, they reached a small clearing near the stream. The water was clear and fresh, and the surrounding plants offered edible fruits and roots. Garrick inspected the area, nodding in approval. "This will be perfect for gathering food," he said. "We can set up traps for small creatures, collect water, and harvest what the forest gives us." Myra immediately began examining the plants, identifying which ones could be used for food, which for medicine, and which for construction. Garrick watched her work, impressed by her speed and accuracy. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, they prepared to return to the cabin. Myra paused, looking back at the clearing. "This place, it feels alive, like it's welcoming us." Garrick smiled. "It is, but remember the forest is also dangerous. Respect it and it will give you life. Ignore it and it can take life just as easily." On the way back, they encountered a small obstacle, a fallen tree blocking their path. Garrick studied it for a moment, then began using his axe to clear the way. Myra watched, then stepped forward with her own ideas. She suggested using a system of ropes and pulleys to move the log more efficiently, reducing the risk of injury. Together, they managed to clear the path quickly and safely. Garrick felt a surge of pride, not just in their success, but in the partnership they were forming. Myra's ingenuity and courage complemented his experience and strength, creating a team far greater than the sum of its parts. Back at the cabin, they prepared a simple meal over the fire. Myra spoke quietly, almost to herself, about the future she imagined. A future where they could live safely, where the child could grow without fear, where humans could thrive even in the harshest environments. Garrick listened, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent years in isolation, focused only on survival. But now, he realized that survival alone was not enough. Life was about connection, about building something lasting, about nurturing the next generation. That night, as the cabin settled into silence, Garrick stayed awake longer than usual, watching Myra sleep. He thought about the challenges they would face, the dangers lurking beyond the forest, and the unknowns of the universe. But he also thought about the strength and resilience of humans, the ingenuity and courage that had carried them across galaxies and allowed them to survive against all odds. He knew that whatever came next, they could face it, together. The days continued in a similar rhythm, but Garrick noticed subtle changes in Myra. She was growing stronger, more confident, more attuned to the forest. Her observations became sharper, her ideas more creative. She began to anticipate problems before they arose, suggesting solutions that Garrick would never have thought of on his own. One morning, while checking a trap they had set for small creatures, Myra paused. "Garrick, look at this." She pointed to a small, glowing plant near the edge of the clearing. Its leaves shimmered in colors he had never seen, and a faint hum emanated from it. Garrick approached, intrigued. "This plant, it's reacting to us," Myra said. "I think it senses life. Maybe it can be useful, or maybe it's a warning." Garrick nodded, studying the plant carefully. "Either way, we'll respect it. The forest has its own rules, and we need to learn them." Over the next few days, they observed the glowing plants, noting how they responded to movement, light, and sound. Myra suggested ways to use the plants to mark safe paths or alert them to approaching creatures. Garrick realized that her insights could give them a significant advantage, turning the forest from a dangerous place into an environment they could navigate with confidence. As they worked, Garrick felt a growing sense of hope. Myra was not just surviving, she was thriving. And in doing so, she was teaching him to see the forest and life itself in a new way. The forest of Thalora, once a place of solitude and survival, had become a place of learning, discovery, and partnership. Garrick and Myra were no longer simply two individuals struggling to exist. They were a team, a family in the making, bound by trust, respect, and the shared determination to survive and thrive. And as Garrick watched Myra carefully tend to the plants, prepare tools, and plan their next steps, he understood something profound. Humans were not just survivors. They were creators, innovators, and caretakers, capable of shaping the world around them, even in the most remote and unforgiving corners of the galaxy. For the first time in years, Garrick allowed himself to imagine the future, not just for himself, not just for Myra, but for the child she carried, and for the possibilities that lay ahead. The forest was vast, the universe was wide, and the challenges were many. But together they could face them all. The forest of Thalora had settled into a rhythm with Garrick and Myra. The trees whispered above them, streams gurgled softly, and the forest floor seemed alive with subtle movements. But even in the calm, Garrick felt it, the sense that life on Thalora was not something to be taken for granted. The forest was vast, and it had secrets. One morning, Garrick woke before sunrise, as he often did, to check the traps they had set for small creatures. Myra was still asleep under the thick blanket near the hearth, breathing steadily. Garrick stepped outside, the air crisp with the scent of dew and wet earth. He listened, letting the forest speak to him as he had learned to do over the years. A faint rustle in the distance caught his attention. He froze, eyes scanning the dense trees. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Movement, something alive, something large. Garrick's hand went to the hilt of his knife, not to attack, but to be ready. He had faced wild creatures before, but the forest had never failed to teach him respect. He returned inside, shaking Myra gently. Wake up! There's something out there. We need to be careful today. Myra stirred, eyes half closed, then focused. Do you think it's dangerous? Could be curious, could be hunting, Garrick said. We'll find out soon enough, but stay close. They packed lightly, taking only what was necessary for the morning work, and moved cautiously toward the source of the movement. Myra's eyes scanned every shadow, her instincts sharpening. Garrick noticed how quickly she adjusted, how alert she became, and felt a swell of pride. Even in a dangerous world, humans could adapt fast. As they approached a clearing, they saw it. A massive creature, its body covered in thick green scales that blended perfectly with the trees around it. It had 4 legs, each ending in wide, clawed feet, and its head was adorned with horn-like structures. Its eyes, deep and amber, regarded them with curiosity rather than aggression. Garrick froze, observing. The creature did not make a sound. Myra crouched beside him, whispering, "It's not attacking, it's watching." "Exactly," Garrick said softly. "Respect it, don't scare it. It's part of the forest. We are guests here." They moved slowly, keeping their distance. Myra took out a small notebook she had begun keeping, sketching the creature and noting its movements. Garrick watched her carefully, impressed. Humans had an incredible ability to observe, learn, and adapt. Myra was proving it daily. After a long, tense morning, the creature moved away, disappearing into the dense forest. Garrick exhaled slowly. That's a lesson. Not everything big and frightening wants to harm you. Sometimes it's just testing your patience. Myra nodded, writing down every detail. I think we could learn a lot from it. Its behavior, its instincts, maybe even its diet. It could help us survive here more efficiently. Garrick smiled faintly. That's the human spirit right there. Observing, learning, finding opportunity in every situation. You're remarkable, Myra. The rest of the day passed in cautious work. They collected herbs, repaired parts of the cabin, and inventoried their supplies. Myra experimented with new tools, refining her pulley system for lifting heavier logs, and even suggesting ways to store water that would keep it clean for longer periods. Garrick marveled at her ingenuity. Every day she proved that humans were not just survivors, they were creators, innovators, and problem solvers. Late in the afternoon, the wind shifted. Garrick's instincts told him something was approaching. He gestured for Myra to stop and crouch. They moved silently through the forest, following a small ridge that gave them a better view. In the distance, they saw them, drones, small, sleek metallic spheres hovering above the trees, scanning the forest floor. Garrick's eyes narrowed. These were not wild creatures. These were human-made, sent to locate life, to monitor, maybe even to capture. They're scouts, Garrick said quietly. From the corporations, they've been searching for someone, maybe you. Myra's eyes widened. Why would they care about me? Garrick shook his head. I don't know yet, but we have to move. Now. They retreated deeper into the forest, using every trick Garrick knew to remain unseen. Myra followed closely, absorbing every move. She began suggesting ways to use the terrain to their advantage. Faint animal trails that would confuse the drones, thick undergrowth to block sensors, even creating small decoys from branches and leaves. Garrick realized that her presence was not just helpful, she was invaluable. Hours passed in tense silence. The drones hovered and scanned, but thanks to their careful movements, Garrick and Myra remained hidden. Finally, as night fell and the forest became a shadowed maze of shapes and sounds, the drones retreated. Breathing heavily, Garrick sank against a tree. That was close. Myra nodded, touching her stomach. Too close, but we survived. Yes, Garrick said, a note of admiration in his voice. Because humans adapt, you adapted, and that's why we're still here. The next morning, they set out to fortify the cabin. Garrick had always relied on brute strength and knowledge of the forest, but Myra introduced small but effective innovations. She suggested creating hidden storage areas, reinforcing doors with branches and stones, and even setting up small alarms that would alert them to movement outside. You're turning this cabin into a fortress, Garrick said, laughing softly. Myra smiled. I want us to be safe. I've learned the hard way that danger doesn't wait. Days turned into weeks. The bond between Garrick and Myra grew stronger. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Myra spoke of her past, of the betrayal by her brother, and the fear she had felt for months. Garrick listened, offering comfort and perspective. In return, he shared tales of his years alone on Thalora, the lessons he had learned, and the moments of beauty he had witnessed in the wild. One afternoon, while gathering fruit from a rare tree, Myra paused. "Garrick, I think the baby is reacting to the forest. It moves when I approach certain plants or when there's water nearby." Garrick frowned, curious. "Moves like instinctively?" "Yes," Myra said, placing a hand on her stomach. "It's like it knows what's safe and what's not. It's early, but I can feel it." Garrick was silent for a long moment. "That's remarkable. Humans are incredible. Even before birth, they find ways to adapt to survive." Myra smiled faintly. "Maybe it's why we survived as a species. We learn, we adapt, we find ways to thrive even in the harshest conditions." Garrick nodded, a deep respect in his eyes. "Exactly, and that's why I'm not afraid. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." That night, as they sat by the fire, Garrick and Myra planned for the future. They knew the drones would return, that the forest held dangers they could not yet predict, and that raising a child in such an environment would be challenging. But they also knew that humans had survived worse, because of courage, intelligence, and the willingness to work together. Myra's sketches and notes littered the cabin floor. She had begun mapping the surrounding forest, noting safe paths, water sources, and areas with high plant diversity. Garrick watched her, impressed by her dedication and foresight. "You're not just surviving," he said softly. "You're preparing for the next step." "That's what humans do. We think ahead, we adapt, we plan." Myra looked up, eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "I want the baby to have a future, not just to survive, but to thrive, and I want us to thrive too." Garrick nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "Then we'll make it happen. We'll learn from the forest, from each other, and from the challenges we face. And one day we'll look back and see how far we've come." The days continued in a delicate balance of work, learning, and preparation. Myra's instincts grew sharper, her understanding of the forest more profound. Garrick marveled at how quickly she had become an expert in survival, not just through observation, but through innovation. She was already shaping their environment, making it safer, more efficient, and more sustainable. One morning, they awoke to a strange sound, a deep, low rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. Garrick and Myra exchanged a glance, both knowing that this was no ordinary animal. They grabbed their tools and cautiously moved toward the source. In a small clearing, they saw it, a massive herd of thallara grazers, larger than anything they had encountered before. The creature's movements were chaotic, but there was a rhythm to it, a natural order that Garrick instinctively understood. Myra watched in awe. "They're magnificent," she whispered. Garrick nodded. "And dangerous if we're in the wrong place. Stay calm, watch their patterns. Move slowly." They observed the herd for hours, noting the paths, the feeding habits, and the interactions. Myra suggested ways to gather materials safely from nearby areas without disturbing the animals. Garrick agreed, impressed once again by her insight. As night fell, the herd moved on, leaving the forest quieter than it had been in days. Garrick and Myra returned to the cabin, exhausted but exhilarated. They had faced danger, observed, and adapted. Once again, humans had proven their resilience, their intelligence, and their ability to thrive in the wild. And as they sat by the fire, Myra resting her hand on her stomach, Garrick realized something profound. Survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about learning, adapting, and preparing for the future. It was about connection, trust, and the ability to see opportunity even in the face of danger. Humans, Garrick thought, were extraordinary. The forest had changed since Myra had arrived. What had once been a place of danger now felt alive with possibility. Every tree, every plant, every rustle of leaves carried meaning, and Garrick could sense that Myra understood the forest in ways he never could alone. She had become more than a companion. She was a partner, a teacher, and a force that brought life into their small world. The cabin was busier than ever. Supplies were organized, traps checked daily, and their storage areas reinforced. Myra moved with calm efficiency, her hand often resting on her stomach as the baby grew stronger with each passing day. Garrick watched her quietly, thinking about the life they were preparing to welcome into the world. Even before birth, the child was teaching them lessons about patience, adaptability, and hope. One morning, Garrick woke to find Myra standing outside, looking toward the horizon. The sun had just risen, casting long shadows across the forest floor. "Morning," he said, stretching as he walked over to her. "Morning," she replied softly. "I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the future, about how we'll survive and how we'll make this place safe for the baby." Garrick nodded, understanding the weight of her thoughts. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "We've survived everything so far, and humans were built to adapt. You mean the baby will thrive." Myra smiled faintly, her hand brushing her stomach. "I hope so." They spent the day reinforcing their shelter. Myra suggested a small extension to the cabin, a safer space where the baby could be born. She designed a system of supports using lightweight wood and natural fibers, creating a separate area that was still part of the main structure, but more protected from wind, rain, and any curious wildlife. Garrick followed her instructions, impressed by her foresight and attention to detail. By afternoon, the structure was complete. It was simple but strong. It would serve as both a nursery and a safe haven in case of storms or unexpected visitors. Garrick admired Myra's ingenuity. Humans had a way of thinking beyond the immediate moment, planning for challenges before they arrived. It was one of the reasons humanity had survived so long across so many worlds. As evening approached, they sat outside, watching the forest glow under the light of Thalora's twin moons. The air was filled with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, the soft gurgle of the stream nearby, and the whisper of leaves in the wind. "I'm scared," Myra admitted quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've never done this before, giving birth, raising a child in a place like this. What if I fail?" Garrick reached out, placing a hand over hers. "You won't fail," he said firmly. "You've survived everything so far. You're strong, smart, and capable, and you won't be alone. I'll be here. We'll face it together." Myra looked at him, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The following days were a careful balance of preparation and observation. They gathered food, monitored the forest, and refined their tools. Myra's instincts grew sharper, her awareness heightened. She noticed patterns in the movement of wildlife, predicted changes in weather, and even began experimenting with small medicinal remedies using the plants they had identified earlier. Garrick watched her quietly, realizing that humans were not just survivors. They were innovators, problem solvers, and creators. One afternoon, while inspecting a nearby grove for edible roots, Myra paused. "Garrick, the drones might come back. I've been thinking about ways to hide the cabin better, to make it harder for anyone to find us." Garrick nodded. "Good thinking. We can use the terrain, the undergrowth, and even some of the materials we've collected to create a camouflage that blends with the forest." They spent hours working on the camouflage, covering the roof with branches, moss, and leaves, and reinforcing the walls with natural materials that made the cabin almost invisible from above. Myra even suggested using the glowing plants they had discovered earlier as subtle markers that would only be visible to them. Garrick marveled at her creativity. Humans had an uncanny ability to see solutions where others might see only problems. Night fell and they rested, listening to the forest around them. The days were growing longer, the nights colder, but they were ready. Everything they did, every tool, every observation, every improvement was preparing them for the arrival of the child. One morning, Myra woke Garrick with a gentle shake. "It's time," she whispered. Garrick's heart raced. They had prepared for this moment, but anticipation never made it easier. He helped her move to the small nursery area they had built, guiding her carefully. Myra's breathing was steady, but Garrick could see the tension in her eyes. Hours passed. Garrick remained by her side, offering encouragement and support, watching the forest outside their window as the world continued on its quiet rhythm. Myra's strength was extraordinary. Even in pain, she was focused, determined, and resilient. Garrick marveled at her courage, reminded once again of humanity's ability to endure and adapt in the face of challenge. Finally, as the twin moons of Thalora rose high in the sky, the moment came. Myra cried out, a mixture of exhaustion and relief, and Garrick held her hand tightly. The air was filled with tension and hope, the quiet of the forest waiting with them. Then a small, clear cry echoed through the room. Garrick felt a rush of emotion he had not expected, relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of wonder. Myra's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. She held the baby close, her movements gentle and protective. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling. Garrick looked down at the small bundle in her arms. The child's eyes were closed, but Garrick could already sense a spark, a resilience, a vitality, and an instinctive awareness that reminded him of Myra and herself. Even in the harsh wilderness of Thalora, life had found a way to thrive. They spent the first night tending to the newborn, feeding, comforting, and observing. Myra's instincts were extraordinary. She knew when the baby needed warmth, when it needed to be held, and even how to soothe it with sounds and movements. Garrick assisted, learning quickly, guided by Myra's intuition. Together, they discovered a rhythm, a partnership that extended beyond survival into the delicate care of new life. In the days that followed, the forest seemed to take notice. The glowing plants near their cabin appeared more vibrant, the streams flowed a little clearer, and even the creatures of the forest seemed to move with a subtle caution around their home. Garrick watched it all in awe. The forest, once indifferent and sometimes dangerous, now felt like it was acknowledging their presence, respecting their perseverance, and welcoming the next generation of humans into its vast expanse. Myra and Garrick continued to fortify their home, now with the baby in mind. They created safer pathways, more secure storage, and even a small garden using both natural and cultivated plants. Myra's ingenuity and adaptability inspired Garrick daily. He realized that the future of humanity on Thalora was not just about survival, it was about growth, innovation, and resilience. One evening, as they sat outside watching the twin moons rise, Myra spoke quietly. "Do you think the child will be ready for this world?" "It's harsh even with all we've done." Garrick smiled, taking her hand. "It will be ready. Humans are built for this. Adaptable, strong, and clever. We've survived worse, and now this child will thrive. It's in their blood just like it's in ours." Myra rested her head against his shoulder, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in years, she felt a future that was not defined by fear, but by possibility. Together, they had faced danger, adapted, and built a safe haven in the middle of an untamed world. Now, with the child among them, they had a reason to push further, to explore more, and to continue shaping their corner of Thalora. Over the following weeks, Garrick and Myra worked as a team, raising the child and continuing to observe and interact with the forest. Myra documented everything: the behavior of wildlife, the growth of plants, and even the subtle reactions of the baby to its environment. Garrick contributed his knowledge of survival and the forest, teaching both Myra and the child the skills that would ensure their long-term safety and prosperity. Through their efforts, they discovered the true strength of humans, the ability to adapt, to innovate, to care for one another, and to thrive even in the most remote and unforgiving environments. The forest, once a place of solitude and danger, had become a classroom, a sanctuary, and a home. And as Garrick watched Myra cradle the child under the soft glow of the moonlight, he understood something profound. Humanity's survival was not just a matter of strength or skill. It was a matter of hope, connection, and the courage to face the unknown. The child slept peacefully, the soft rise and fall of its chest a reminder that life would continue. Garrick felt a deep sense of purpose settle over him. He had gone from a lonely lumberjack to a guardian of life, a protector of the next generation, and a witness to the enduring strength of humans. For the first time in years, Garrick truly believed in the future. And in that belief, he found not just hope, but the certainty that humanity could thrive anywhere, even in the most distant corners of the galaxy. The forest of Thalora had grown quiet with the coming of dawn. A soft mist hung among the towering silverwoods, and the twin moons, now faint in the early light, gave way to the pale glow of the rising sun. Garrick stepped outside the cabin, inhaling the crisp air. The forest had changed since Myra and the baby had arrived. It was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a home, a living network of life that seemed to acknowledge their presence. Myra was already awake, sitting outside with the child in her lap. The baby stirred, reaching tiny hands toward the sunlight as if sensing the world for the first time. Garrick approached quietly, marveling at the moment. Despite the dangers and challenges they had faced, life had persisted, and in many ways it had flourished. "Good morning," he said softly, crouching beside them. "Good morning," Myra replied, her eyes warm but focused. "I was just watching its learning. Even this early it notices things, reacts to light and movement. I think it's special." Garrick smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "All humans are special in some way. We survive because we adapt, because we think, because we care. You've shown that clearly. And now the baby will too." For weeks, they had worked tirelessly to make the cabin and the surrounding area not just a safe space, but a thriving corner of the forest. They expanded their garden, planting edible plants and herbs that could provide both nutrition and medicine. They set up rain collection systems and created shelters for the wildlife they had come to respect. Myra's innovations complemented Garrick's knowledge perfectly. Together, they were creating a microcosm of human ingenuity, a small but resilient community in the heart of a wild planet. The baby had grown quickly, showing signs of sharp awareness and curiosity. It reached for the glowing plants nearby, responded to the sounds of the forest, and even seemed to recognize Garrick and Myra's voices. The two adults watched in awe. Humans were not merely survivors. They were learners, thinkers, and problem solvers from the moment they were born. One afternoon, Garrick and Myra decided to explore further into the forest. They wanted to identify new resources, check on hidden traps, and continue observing the wildlife. The baby, now able to sit upright in a small harness, accompanied them, looking around with bright, curious eyes. As they moved through the forest, Myra pointed out patterns in the movement of animals, ways to track resources, and potential areas for expansion. Garrick followed her suggestions, impressed by her insight and quick thinking. Humans, he thought, had an incredible ability to see solutions where others might see only problems. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. They worked together to reinforce their shelter and store the day's gathered resources. The baby, tired from the day's adventure, slept peacefully in Myra's arms. Garrick watched them, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and hope. Night fell and the forest transformed once again. The glowing plants shimmered softly, the streams reflected the light of the twin moons, and the creatures of Thalora moved quietly among the trees. Garrick and Myra sat by the fire, reflecting on all they had accomplished. "We've come a long way," Myra said, her voice filled with wonder. "From the first day I arrived, scared and alone, to this, a home, a safe place, a future for our child." "Yes," Garrick agreed, "and it's only the beginning. The forest has taught us much, but there's more to learn. We'll continue to adapt, to grow, to thrive. That's what humans do." The next morning, they began constructing additional structures near the cabin. Simple shelters, workstations, and storage areas that could accommodate more people if others ever came seeking refuge. Myra suggested ways to use the natural terrain to protect these structures, making them almost invisible to anyone searching from the air. Garrick implemented her ideas, amazed at how quickly she had grasped the principles of stealth, safety, and sustainability. Days turned into weeks, and their small enclave began to take shape. They had created a safe, thriving space in the heart of the wilderness, one that could support life and encourage growth. The baby was learning to crawl, then walk, showing remarkable awareness of the forest and its rhythms. Garrick and Myra continued to teach, guide, and observe, nurturing not just survival, but curiosity, intelligence, and confidence. One afternoon, as Garrick repaired a damaged section of the cabin roof, he noticed movement in the trees above. A small group of human colonists, lost or abandoned, had found their way to the enclave. Myra met them at the edge of the clearing, her voice calm but firm. "You're safe here," she told them. "We have food, shelter, and protection. Stay with us and we'll help each other survive." The newcomers hesitated at first, wary of the wild forest and the strange pair who had taken control of it. But the warmth and confidence in Myra and Garrick's voices, the visible safety of the cabin, and the evidence of their thriving micro-community convinced them. One by one, they joined the enclave, bringing with them their own skills, stories, and knowledge. Garrick watched as the small group settled in. Humans had always survived through cooperation, innovation, and shared effort. And now, in the middle of Thalora's wilderness, that same spirit was taking root once again. The forest responded. Animals that had once kept their distance began to accept the presence of humans. Plants and herbs flourished under the careful attention of the enclave. The small community was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a thriving ecosystem, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of humanity. One evening, as the enclave gathered for a shared meal, Myra held the child, now toddling with cautious confidence among the group. Garrick looked around at the smiling faces, the laughter, and the cooperation. Humans had survived for millennia by learning, adapting, and creating. Here, in the wild heart of Thalora, they were doing the same thing again. Myra leaned against Garrick, whispering, "Look at what we've built. All of this from just the two of us and the forest. Garrick smiled. It's more than that, it's humans, our spirit, our courage, our ability to adapt and thrive. That's what made this possible, that's why we're here, and why we'll continue to grow. The child toddled over, reaching for a small, glowing plant. It reacted, shimmering brighter as if acknowledging the new life. Myra picked it up gently, smiling. It's learning from the forest, she said. Already adapting, already thriving. Garrick knelt beside them, watching the interaction. The forest, once indifferent, had become a teacher, a partner, and a witness to human ingenuity. Humans were not just survivors, they were creators, innovators, and protectors. The following days were filled with construction, observation, and teaching. The enclave grew stronger, more organized, and more self-sufficient. The child learned quickly, exploring under careful supervision, interacting with the environment, and absorbing knowledge from both Garrick and Myra. Humans, Garrick realized, had a way of turning challenges into opportunities, of thriving in the most unlikely places. One night, as the forest lay quiet under the twin moons, Garrick reflected on the journey they had taken. He had gone from a lonely lumberjack, isolated and disconnected, to a guardian of life, a protector of the next generation, and a participant in something far greater than himself. Myra had arrived frightened and alone, but she had grown into a leader, an innovator, and a mother capable of guiding humanity's future. The child slept peacefully, the small rise and fall of its chest a reminder of what they had achieved. The enclave, thriving in the wilderness, was proof of human adaptability, courage, and ingenuity. Garrick realized that their success was not just survival, it was a celebration of what humans could accomplish, even in the most remote and unforgiving corners of the galaxy. As the dawn broke once more, Garrick and Myra stepped outside together, holding hands and watching the forest awaken. Birds called from the treetops, streams glimmered in the sunlight, and the glowing plants shimmered softly. Humans had carved a safe, thriving life from the wilderness, not through domination but through respect, intelligence, and cooperation. Myra smiled, holding the child close. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We'll keep learning, adapting, and growing." "For the child, for us, for the future." Garrick nodded, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over him. Humans are capable of incredible things, and here in this forest we've proven it. Life will continue, will thrive, and will leave a legacy of strength, courage, and hope. The forest seemed to respond, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves as if in approval. Garrick, Myra, and the child stood together, a family forged not by circumstance alone, but by courage, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit. The enclave thrived, and the forest became a sanctuary not just of survival, but of growth, innovation, and hope. The child grew strong, learning from the land, the animals, and the humans who guided it. Garrick and Myra continued to explore, experiment, and teach, ensuring that every challenge became an opportunity and every danger a lesson. And in the heart of Thalora, humans had found not only survival, but life, rich, vibrant, and filled with promise. They were not just part of the forest. They were a force within it, shaping their world through intelligence, courage, and the enduring will to thrive. Garrick looked at Myra and the child one last time that evening, feeling the weight and wonder of their journey. Humanity had survived this far because they adapted, because they cared, and because they refused to give up. Here, on a distant planet at the edge of colonized space, that same spirit had created a thriving home, a family, and a future. And Garrick knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges came next, humans would continue to endure, to innovate, and to flourish. The forest of Thalora, once a place of isolation and danger, had become a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and hope, a living proof that wherever humans went, life could not only survive but thrive.